Hello fellow collectors, I hope you're doing very well indeed. Today I continue my series where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month. July was an interesting month for me, where I watched some more great westerns, as well as a few newer releases like Dungeons and Dragons and John Wick 4. And I even had a few surprises which included watching the first Hitchcock film I've seen that I didn't really like, which is not something I expected to ever happen. Definitely an intriguing month for me film-wise. And so, without further ado, let's talk about the best films I watched in July. First up is Read My Lips, a film from 2001, directed by Jacques Audiard and starring Vincent Cassel and Emmanuel Devos. I caught this one on the Mubi streaming service as sadly there is no current Blu-ray release of this. The only one I could find was a German release that unfortunately looks to be out of print. After watching Rust and Bone and Paris 13th District in the last couple months, I've been wanting to watch more of Jacques Audiard's films, and that's despite thoroughly disliking Paris 13th District really. But Rust and Bone of course was brilliant. I'm a big fan of Vincent Cassel too, so this one had great promise, and I'm glad to say that it definitely lived up to my expectations. It presents itself as an erotic thriller. Certainly I think some of the cover art portrays it like that, but it's not really like that at all. This was something a bit more complex, I think, and a bit of a mix of genres. It almost takes a slice of life, thriller, and splashes of a bit of romantic chemistry in there as well to create an incredibly interesting film. It's about a woman who is hard of hearing, played superbly by Emmanuel Devos, who works in an office that doesn't respect her or her contributions, but as she is overworked, they end up hiring an assistant, played by Vincent Cassel, who is a former convict. As the film goes on, they get to know each other, help and support each other in various ways, and end up becoming embroiled in some illegal activities as part of Cassel's character's past comes back to throw a spanner in the works. It's a film that is a coming together of a stable character with an unstable one, the familiar with the chaotic, but touches on areas like reformation and can a cheetah ever change its spots, loyalty, friendship and criminality. It reminded me in a lot of ways of the film True Things from 2021, which stars the excellent Ruth Wilson and Tom Burke, who you might know from The Souvenir. It's a film that follows a lot of similar lines, though in some different ways, and certainly with more of a focus on a romantic side of the relationship. But if you enjoyed that one, I think Read My Lips will be right up your street, and vice versa, of course. Next is either the second best or the joint best film I've seen all this year. It's Ida from 2013, directed by Paweł Pawlikowski and starring Agata Trebukowska and Agata Kuleczka, which hopefully I've got vaguely correct. This one was simply incredible, and it's the exact type of film that seems to really connect with me, and it deservedly won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film that year. This is a slow, quiet and contemplative journey about life, death, family and faith. It is beautifully shot in stunning black and white and gorgeously lit. Each frame has a vibrancy and a life to it, and you really get immersed in the atmosphere. It's set in post-war Poland in the early 60s and is about a young nun in training who is told to go and stay with her aunt for some time before taking her vows. She was an orphan and had been raised by the nuns in the convent, and so it's all that she knows. But she agrees and embarks upon this journey of discovery to see what life is like in the wider world by meeting her only living relative who, safe to say, lives a very different lifestyle. So much happens in this film, and yet so much of it is unspoken. But somehow you just feel so deeply. It is incredibly moving, and the phrase hauntingly beautiful is the only thing I can think to use to come close to articulating it. Agata Trebukowska is astonishingly good in her role here. Her eyes are these deep pools that you cannot help but fall into. I can't believe she hasn't done much acting since, because she clearly has amazing talent, relating so much and yet saying so little. I was floored by this film, an evocative, enrapturing and profound experience. I'm so glad that I blind bought this and took the chance on this lovely plain archive edition of it, because this film certainly deserves the premium treatment for sure. Next is The Naked Spur, from 1953, directed by Anthony Mann and starring James Stewart, Janet Leigh, Millard Mitchell, Robert Ryan and Ralph Meeker, who I recognised so much but I couldn't for the life of me place him. But he's actually the protagonist from the excellent film noir Kiss Me Deadly, though he rocks a great moustache in this one. It is a truly remarkable cast in this film, full of incredible talent, and thankfully they all deliver superb performances. This was my first purchase from Warner Archive, which has recently launched in the UK, and it was a great one to start with. This is the third collaboration between Anthony Mann and James Stewart, and a continuation of James Stewart's sort of reinvention. And here he plays a fairly harsh and selfish character who is looking to cash in the bounty on a criminal he's been chasing, played by Robert Ryan, who has been on the run with Janet Leigh. Along the way, two others become involved and sort of poke their noses in and edge their way into the goings-on and become part of the crew to collect this bounty. I'm not sure what I was expecting from this one, but it certainly wasn't what I saw. This was much more, perhaps shall we say, realistic, harsh and unrelenting, with the characters outwardly jovial, but really out for themselves. Definitely a motley crew here. It grows in tension and has a climactic and brilliant ending, and was overall thoroughly engaging. You are kept on your toes for more or less the entire runtime. I've been loving watching Anthony Mann's westerns recently, and this was another in a long line of excellent films that he made with James Stewart. Not the feel-good and idealised westerns that had become so popular, but definitely a darker and a different style of western. Then we have The Murderer Lives at 21, a film from 1942 and the directorial debut of the great Henri-Georges Clouzot, and starring Pierre Fresnay and Suzy Delaire. Sadly, this Eureka edition here is long out of print, but I was very lucky to get my hands on a copy a while back for a reasonable price. This one is about the hunt for a murderer, as the title might suggest, but was not what I was expecting, and actually becomes a really great whodunit in a similar vein to an Agatha Christie novel or a film like Green for Danger, which this one actually reminded me of a lot. We have our inspector, played by Pierre Fresnay, who portrays the perfect balance of confidence, nonchalance, wit and cunning as he tries to solve this mystery. Also becoming embroiled in the goings-on is his wife, played wonderfully by Suzy Delaire. This one is very amusing. It's quick and punchy, and there's a real jovial thread which runs throughout it. It's an absolute delight to watch. We do see the beginnings of the darker shades that Clouzot would go on to explore in his later films, as this one is at its core the story of a hunt for a serial killer who leaves a literal calling card. So not the lightest of themes, but he handles it brilliantly, and despite the dark undercurrent, it is really sort of a bad day cure, and I laughed out loud on several occasions. Overall, it's a solid murder mystery, and one with a great reveal that I had not worked out. It's not the most convoluted of stories, not the one with the most twists and turns, but just a thoroughly enjoyable 84 minutes. And then last but not least, we have Hair Job, which I think is maybe the first Greek film that I've ever seen. It's from 2018 and directed by Nikos Labot and starring Marissa Trintanphylidou as our protagonist. There is a special type of joy that this film gets across, about finding happiness and meaning in the small things that so many of us take for granted. Do you remember your first ever paycheck? The sweat of your own labour and the money that you made with your own hands? Can you remember your first purchase with your very own money? How about the joy of just being able to work, having friends and having good colleagues? You could boil this one down to the story of a woman finding her independence in work, but there is a lot more to this one than that. It's also a domestic drama set during the Greek economic collapse where tempers fray, family frustration seeps into daily life, trying to deal with difficult kids, trying to make ends meet, and marital struggles as well, brought about by the bleak economic reality and depressing job market. We meet a regular housewife with few real-world skills outside of the home who ends up getting this job as a cleaner in a shopping mall and then supporting her family. Work becomes her harbour, her freedom, a place where she feels cared for and appreciated. She is shown respect and finds community, but it is by no means all positive. Her being in work, of course, starts to affect the rest of her life and her family who have their own frustrations. Colleagues don't always get along. People you thought you could trust don't always remain that way. The difficult economic situation in the country surrounds the employees as they are treated in certain ways by the company. This one is a ride of ups and downs, but I think overall one that leaves you with a positive message about expanding your horizons and being able to accomplish things that you never thought you could, and the importance of friendships. I don't believe there is a musical score to this one, and it just emphasises how great the acting is here. I teared up at one point as it really got to me. I caught this one on Mubi, though sadly it's now left, and I don't believe there is a Blu-ray or an easily accessible DVD, which is just such a shame. But if you can find this one to watch, it is absolutely worth your time. Finally then, onto some honourable mentions, and first is La Moustache, which I came close to putting on my list above, but it just didn't quite have enough to it. Still though, it's another film starring Emmanuel Devos, and it was incredibly interesting, about a man who has had a moustache for most of his life. His wife, for example, has never seen him without one, and he then decides to shave it, and for some reason no one comments and no one seems to notice, and then when he mentions it, they all tell him he's never had a moustache. Intriguing to say the least. Then we have Welcome to the Dollhouse from Radiance, which was a really good, if very dark watch, all about adolescence. And then Bunny Lake is Missing, which I would say is sort of like Otto Preming's take on Psycho. And then The Man from Laramie, another Anthony Mann and James Stewart western, which was fantastic. And finally, Shane, another classic western, this one with Alan Ladd. And that's everything from me in my July in film. I hope yours was a wonderful month of watching great movies, and I hope your August has been great as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.